power has a taste. Henry VIII knew this better than most. It was metallic, like blood on the tongue, sweet as honeyed wine, and bitter as the last kiss of a dying wife. From his throne in Westminster, he would often run his tongue across his teeth, chasing that flavor, never quite satisfied, always hungry for more. They say the crown changes a man. For Henry, it revealed him, stripped away the veneer of the Renaissance prince to expose something far more primal beneath. The young king who once wrote love sonnets and danced until dawn would transform into a creature of appetite and rage, a man whose desires would reshape an entire nation's soul. Born the spare, not the heir, young Henry was raised in the shadow of his elder brother Arthur. The death that elevated him to heir apparent would mark the beginning of his obsession with mortality and succession. Modern psychologists might recognize the pattern. The second son suddenly thrust into the spotlight, carrying the weight of a dynasty on shoulders that had never been meant to bear such a burden. To be a king, he would later write, is to be alone with God. The words betray both arrogance and terror. A man convinced of his divine right, while secretly afraid he might be wrong. The historical records paint him in broad strokes: 6 wives, 2 executed, a break with Rome that reshaped Western Christianity, a transformation from Renaissance prince to tyrannical monarch. But between these lines lies a more complex portrait. A man fighting against his own mortality, desperate to secure his legacy, haunted by the ghosts of sons who never lived to inherit his crown. His physical transformation became a mirror of his psychological evolution. The young athlete who could joust with the best in Europe slowly morphed into a monster of flesh and fury, his waist expanding with his power, his wounds festering like his grudges. The leg injury that never properly healed became both literal and metaphorical, a rot at the foundation of his magnificence. The executions he ordered were not merely acts of justice, they were performances of power. Each severed head was a statement, each death a demonstration of his absolute authority. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had inspired him to break with Rome, found herself transformed from object of desire to object lesson. Her execution was choreographed with the same attention to detail as their courtship had been. His marriages tell the story of a man increasingly consumed by his own mythology. Catherine of Aragon, the first and longest-lasting queen, represented duty and tradition. Anne Boleyn was passion and ambition. Jane Seymour embodied his desperate need for a male heir. Anne of Cleves became a symbol of his political miscalculations. Catherine Howard represented his futile grasp at youth. Catherine Parr survived by being smarter than her predecessors, understanding that to manage Henry was to manage a force of nature. The dissolution of the monasteries revealed another facet of his character, the ability to destroy an entire way of life while convincing himself it was God's will. Ancient abbeys were torn down stone by stone, their treasures flowing into royal coffers, their monks and nuns cast out into a world that had no place for them. Henry watched it all with the detachment of a man who had learned to see destruction as creation. The ghost of his brother Arthur seemed to haunt every decision. When he married Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, was it duty or defiance that drove him? When he later refused to recognize the marriage, was it conscience or convenience? His palaces grew larger as his world grew smaller. By the end, he could barely move, carried from room to room in a chair, his ulcerated leg a constant source of pain and putrid odor. Yet still he commanded, still he killed, still he married and divorced and rewrote the laws of God and man to suit his purposes. In his final years, mirrors became his enemies. He would not allow himself to be painted as anything less than massive and powerful, even as his body betrayed him. The famous Holbein portrait shows him as he wished to be seen, legs planted wide, hands on hips, every inch the dominant alpha male. The reality was far more pathetic. A man trapped in flesh that had become his prison, raging against the inevitability of decay. His death, when it came, was both an end and a beginning. The boy king Edward VI would succeed him, followed by Mary and then Elizabeth, each carrying forward some portion of their father's complicated legacy. The dynasty he had sacrificed so much to secure would end with Elizabeth, his last surviving child dying childless, passing the crown to the Stuarts. Today, Hampton Court Palace still stands, its kitchens still capable of feeding an army, its halls still echoing with the ghosts of courtiers who danced and died at their king's pleasure. In the Great Hall, Henry's portrait stares down at visitors, his small eyes calculating, his massive frame both impressive and grotesque. But in the dead of night, when the tourists have gone and the lights are dim, something else moves through those historic halls. Not quite a ghost, but a memory with teeth, the shadow of a man who reshaped a nation through sheer force of will, who broke with Rome for love and then killed that love for power, who began as a Renaissance prince and ended as a cautionary tale,